Some of the most extraordinary Catholic pilgrimage stories in America are hidden in the Midwest, and one of them leads to a place unlike any other in the country. Across quiet farmland, wooded hills, small towns, and industrial cities are shrines preserving more than 1,000 sacred relics, a sanctuary tied to one of the most remarkable Marian stories in American Catholic history, and a pilgrimage site connected to an apparition the Church formally judged worthy of belief. These are not places people visit simply to admire beautiful buildings. Generations of Catholics have come carrying prayers for healing, conversion, thanksgiving, peace, and hope. Some pilgrims climb through forests toward a basilica that has drawn the faithful for more than a century. Others kneel beside the tomb of a beloved American blessed, enter a shrine preserving the memory of a martyr who gave his life for another man, or walk through an extraordinary grotto constructed stone by stone as an act of faith. And as this countdown moves closer to number 1, the stories become even more powerful, leading deeper into a side of American Catholic history that many people have never encountered. These are the top 10 Catholic pilgrimage sites in the American Midwest. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us to number 1, because every stop reveals something unexpected. But the final shrine holds a story that remained hidden in the American landscape for generations. Number 10. National Shrine of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal, Perryville, Missouri. A small chapel in Paris and a quiet church in rural Missouri should have had little in common. Yet a Marian devotion born in France in the 19th century eventually crossed the Atlantic and took root here, turning Perryville into one of the Midwest's enduring Catholic pilgrimage destinations. The story begins in 1830, when Saint Catherine Labour, a young daughter of charity in Paris, reported apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. During one of those encounters, she received the design that became known as the Miraculous Medal. 2 years later, the first medals were produced with church approval, and devotion spread rapidly through Catholic communities far beyond France. The medal was carried in pockets, placed around necks, given to the sick, and brought into homes as a reminder of Mary's intercession and trust in the grace of God. By the time that devotion reached Perryville, Catholic roots were already deep in the soil. St. Mary's of the Barons had been established by the Vincentians in 1818, making the site part of an early chapter of Catholic life west of the Mississippi. In 1929, the National Shrine of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal was added to the historic church, giving American Catholics a permanent place to bring the devotion into pilgrimage. Inside, the story of the medal is worked directly into the sacred space. Mary stands above the altar, while the cross, the letter M, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and the circle of 12 stars echo the imagery carried on millions of medals around the world. Elsewhere on the grounds, pilgrims encounter a Marian grotto, devotional paths, statues, and the grave of Venerable Felix de Andres, one of the early Vincentian leaders in the United States. The pilgrimage tradition is still alive. During the 2025 Jubilee year, St. Mary's of the Barons was designated a pilgrimage site within the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Visitors came not simply to look at an old church, but to attend Mass, receive the sacraments, pray before the shrine, and bring intentions from families and communities far beyond Missouri. Near the altar, written petitions continue to accumulate beside flickering votive candles, carrying a devotion that began in a Paris convent chapel nearly 2 centuries ago into the heart of the American Midwest. Number 9. Maria Stein Shrine of the Holy Relics, Maria Stein, Ohio. In a small farming community in Ohio, one quiet chapel holds more sacred relics than most visitors would ever expect to encounter in a single place. Behind its glass cases are more than 1,200 relics of saints, together with 5 relics of the True Cross, and nearly 95% of the collection is identified by the shrine as first-class relics. The scale alone is striking, but the more compelling story is how this extraordinary collection transformed an otherwise quiet Midwestern community into a destination for Catholic pilgrims. During the 19th century, Father Francis de Sales Brunner and the missionaries of the Precious Blood helped establish Catholic communities across western Ohio while bringing sacred relics into the region. The collection expanded again in 1872 when Father J. M. Gartner acquired another 175 relics and brought them to the United States for safekeeping. They were initially intended to travel from place to place, but local Catholics wanted them preserved together, and by 1875 they had been entrusted permanently to the Sisters of the Precious Blood at Maria Stein. As the collection grew, pilgrims began arriving in numbers large enough to change the physical layout of the shrine itself. Visitors seeking to venerate the relics became so numerous that an exterior staircase had to be constructed, allowing them to reach the chapel without passing through the sisters' cloister. By 1892, even that arrangement was no longer enough, because the room containing the relics had become too small for the crowds, forcing the community to create additional chapel space specifically for pilgrims. What had begun as an effort to protect sacred objects had gradually become a living center of Catholic pilgrimage. That history remains visible inside the relic chapel today, where carved altars and rows of reliquaries preserve connections to St. Gaspar del Bufalo, St. Peregrine, St. Ursula and her companions, the early Christian martyr St. Victoria, and many others. At the center of the main altar rests a relic associated with the true cross, shifting attention away from the sheer size of the collection toward the faith that has drawn generations of Catholics to stand before it. Maria Stein remains an active pilgrimage site, with Mass, Eucharistic adoration, relic veneration, prayer, and organized pilgrimages continuing across nearly 30 acres of grounds. Beyond the relic chapel, pilgrims can follow the Stations of the Cross, stop at the Lourdes Grotto, walk through sacred gardens, and enter smaller devotional spaces scattered across the property. Inside the chapel, however, the most distinctive sight remains the rows of reliquaries surrounding the altar, with relics of saints, martyrs, and the true cross, arranged only a few feet from where visitors kneel in prayer. Number 8. Shrine of the Grotto of the Redemption, West Bend, Iowa. Nothing in the flat farmland surrounding West Bend prepares visitors for what suddenly rises from the Iowa landscape. Arches, towers, caves, statues, and biblical scenes emerge from walls covered with crystal, petrified wood, quartz, and brilliantly colored stone. Spread across 9 interconnected grottos, the shrine traces the Catholic story of humanity's fall and redemption in Christ, creating a landscape that feels almost impossible to have been assembled by hand. Yet the entire project began with something far more personal. As a young seminarian, Father Paul Matthias Dauberstein became dangerously ill with pneumonia and prayed for the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, promising to build a shrine in her honor if he recovered. After regaining his health, being ordained, and eventually arriving at Saints Peter and Paul Parish in West Bend, he did not rush into construction. For more than a decade, he gathered unusual stones and minerals, studying how they could be shaped into the sanctuary he had promised. Construction finally began in 1912, and the first Trinity Grotto alone required 5 years of labor. What followed was no ordinary parish building project. Materials arrived from distant parts of the country and beyond, including a Brazilian amethyst weighing roughly 300 pounds that was eventually placed inside the Christmas chapel. Dauberstein transformed these materials into the Garden of Eden, the Nativity, the Ten Commandments, St. Michael, the Stations of the Cross, and other scenes, allowing visitors to move physically through episodes of Scripture rather than simply viewing them from a pew. The unusual architecture still serves an active pilgrimage purpose. Catholics come for prayer, Mass, reconciliation, and organized pilgrimages while moving through the 9 grottos and the adjoining church grounds. Yet one of the most revealing details is found nearby in the museum, where the simple tools Dauberstein once held in his own hands remain preserved only steps from the immense walls of stone, crystal, and petrified wood that consumed decades of his life. Number 7. National Shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe at Marytown, Libertyville, Illinois. At Auschwitz, 10 prisoners were selected to die after another inmate escaped. One of the condemned men began crying out for his wife and children, and then something happened that no one around him could have expected. A Polish Franciscan priest stepped out of line, approached the guards, and asked to take the man's place. That priest was Father Maximilian Kolbe. He was sent to the starvation bunker and died in August of 1940, turning a single decision made inside a concentration camp into one of the most powerful stories of Catholic martyrdom in the 20th century. Yet the American shrine that now preserves his memory had already begun developing its own spiritual identity years before Kolbe died. Eucharistic adoration started at Marytown in 1928, 13 years before his death at Auschwitz, and the permanent Our Lady of the Blessed Sacrament Chapel followed in 1932. Decades later, those two histories converged when Marytown was designated the National Shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe during the Jubilee year of 2000, bringing Kolbe's witness of self-sacrifice into a place already shaped by long-standing Eucharistic devotion. Pilgrims do not encounter his story through biography alone. Inside Marytown, a Holocaust exhibit places Kolbe's final years within the machinery of Nazi persecution, while first-class relics bring the story into immediate physical proximity. 4 mosaics trace episodes from his life, and in the Passion and Kolbe Chapel, an 11-foot image of Kolbe faces a mosaic of Christ crowned with thorns. Directly below the image are relics of the saint, allowing visitors to move from the historical reality of Auschwitz into a space of veneration, prayer, and Mass, without separating the martyr from the faith that shaped his final choice. The strongest visual connection appears inside the chapel itself. Above the pilgrims is an image of Kolbe emerging from the starvation bunker, while only a few feet below, people kneel before his relics. Nearby, the Blessed Sacrament remains exposed within a tradition of adoration that began long before Marytown carried Kolbe's name, and the Holocaust exhibit preserves photographs, documents, and historical context from the world in which his final act took place. Number 6. National Shrine of Our Lady of the Snows, Belleville, Illinois. Every August, under the heavy summer heat of southern Illinois, pilgrims gather at a Marian shrine whose very name seems to contradict the landscape, Our Lady of the Snows. The title reaches back to an ancient Roman tradition associated with Saint Mary Major, where an unexpected snowfall was said to have marked the site of a church dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Centuries later, that devotion reached the American Midwest through a priest whose own ministry had taken him across landscapes where snow was anything but unusual. Father Paul Schulte was an oblate missionary, pilot, and physician who became known as the Flying Priest of the Arctic. He used aircraft to carry medicine, supplies, and assistance to isolated northern missions, often traveling through regions where distance and severe weather could leave communities almost completely cut off. During the late 1930s, Schulte brought his devotion to Our Lady of the Snows to Belleville, linking an ancient Marian tradition from Rome with a growing Catholic community in Illinois. What began as a devotion did not remain confined to a small chapel. By the summer of 1950, development had begun at the shrine's present location, and the property gradually expanded into more than 200 acres of churches, gardens, paths, devotional spaces, and outdoor worship areas. Instead of concentrating everything inside one sanctuary, the shrine was shaped so pilgrims could move through the landscape itself. That experience is especially visible during the annual novena from July 28th through August 5th, when the unusual title of Our Lady of the Snows returns each summer through Mass, prayer, and Marian devotion. Pilgrims can descend toward the main shrine set beside a natural amphitheater, continue toward the Lourdes Grotto and the Way of the Cross, or climb toward the Annunciation Garden overlooking the property. Above the open grounds, large figures of Mary and the Archangel Gabriel stand against the Illinois sky, while paths continue outward across a shrine that began with one missionary carrying an old Marian devotion into the Midwest. Number 5. Solanus Casey Center, Detroit, Michigan. The long lines outside St. Bonaventure in Detroit were not forming to hear a famous preacher. They were waiting for a priest who could not even hear their confessions. Father Solanus Casey had been ordained with restrictions because of difficulties in his theological studies. So much of his ministry unfolded beside a monastery door. Yet people kept arriving with cancer diagnoses, unpaid bills, broken marriages, sick children, and prayers they no longer knew how to carry alone. Solanus listened, wrote their intentions into notebooks, prayed with them, and sent them away with a simple insistence on trusting God and giving thanks. Soon, the monastery door became more than an entrance. Stories circulated about prayers answered after people met the quiet Capuchin friar, and some days the line stretched far beyond the building. Solanus never presented himself as a healer, but the people of Detroit continued seeking him until his death in 1957. Then something unexpected happened. They kept coming. His grave became the new destination, and the flow of visitors eventually led to the opening of the Solanus Casey Center in 2002. Today, more than 100,000 people visit the center each year, many arriving with the same kinds of burdens once carried through the monastery door. But one pilgrim would push Solanus Casey's story far beyond Detroit. Paula Medina Zarate traveled from Panama while suffering from a lifelong skin disorder called ichthyosis. She came intending to pray for others, but at Solanus Casey's tomb, she also asked for his intercession for herself. Paula later reported feeling an intense heat throughout her body, followed by a healing that medical experts involved in the church investigation could not explain. The Catholic Church eventually recognized the healing as a miracle attributed to Solanus Casey's intercession, clearing the way for his beatification. In November of 2017, roughly 70,000 people filled Ford Field as the former monastery porter was declared blessed. Paula carried his relic toward the altar before the enormous crowd. Back at St. Bonaventure, the scale becomes intimate again. Pilgrims approach Solanus Casey's tomb one by one, leaving handwritten petitions beside the resting place of the friar, whom generations of Detroit Catholics once waited outside a monastery door to meet. Number 4. Basilica and National Shrine of Our Lady of Consolation, Cary, Ohio. Every August, after darkness settles over the small town of Cary, a line of candlelight begins moving away from the basilica and toward Shrine Park. Pilgrims walk through the night, praying the rosary before the Vigil Mass of the Assumption, continuing a tradition that still draws Catholics to this Ohio shrine. Yet the procession carries an older memory, one that began on a rural road nearly a century and a half ago, when another group of Catholics found themselves surrounded by a violent storm. On May 24, 1875, Catholics carried a replica statue of Our Lady of Consolation approximately 7 miles from St. Nicholas Church in Frenchtown to the small church at Cary. The image had come from Luxembourg, where devotion to Mary under the title Consoler of the Afflicted had deep roots. As the procession advanced, the shrine's historical account records heavy rain falling across the surrounding countryside, yet neither the statue nor the people walking with it were touched by the downpour. The statue reached Cary, and the event became inseparable from the pilgrimage tradition that followed. The pilgrims who came afterward were often carrying more than curiosity. The sick arrived seeking prayer. Families entrusted personal needs to Mary's intercession, and accounts of favors associated with the shrine circulated among generations of visitors. The Catholic focus remained firmly sacramental. Healing masses include the anointing of the sick, while pilgrims may also receive a blessing with a relic of the true cross. As devotion expanded, the original shrine church was no longer the only sacred space receiving pilgrims. It still stands across from the larger basilica, preserving the physical setting connected to the events of 1875, while the surrounding complex serves organized pilgrimages throughout the year. Then, each August, the story returns to movement. Rosaries are carried into the night, candles form a glowing path toward Shrine Park, and the Vigil Mass follows the procession under the Ohio sky. The first pilgrims once walked 7 miles through a storm, carrying an image from Luxembourg. Generations later, another procession still crosses Cary after sunset with that same Marian devotion at its center. Number 3. Basilica and National Shrine of Mary Help of Christians at Holy Hill, Wisconsin. At Holy Hill, reaching the shrine is part of the pilgrimage itself. The road rises through thick Wisconsin forest, and the journey continues past wooded slopes where life-size scenes of Christ's Passion appear between stone grottos and trees. Only after climbing higher, do the twin towers of the basilica begin to break above the canopy, giving pilgrims their first clear sight of the sanctuary waiting at the summit. Yet Catholics were making their way up this hill long before those towers existed. The first formal shrine was a modest log chapel dedicated in 1863, when this was still a far quieter corner of Wisconsin. Pilgrims continued arriving, and the small chapel eventually gave way to larger churches as devotion outgrew the available space. Discalced Carmelite friars from Bavaria assumed care of Holy Hill in 1906, and construction of the present shrine began 2 decades later. When the basilica was completed and consecrated in 1931, it crowned a pilgrimage tradition that had already been drawing Catholics uphill for generations. The ascent remains central to the experience today. Across 435 acres, pilgrims can follow the Stations of the Cross through the forest, where the terrain forces the journey to slow as each scene of the Passion appears along the climb. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims and visitors come to Holy Hill each year, some arriving for Mass and Marian devotion, others continuing through the wooded grounds before reaching the stone basilica above them. Here, the landscape does not simply surround the shrine, it determines how the pilgrim approaches it. Even after reaching the basilica, there is still another climb. Inside the scenic tower, a narrow staircase rises through 107 tight steps before opening high above southeastern Wisconsin. From there, the Stations of the Cross vanish into the forest far below. The stone towers stand almost at eye level, and miles of countryside stretch beyond the hill in every direction. The pilgrimage that began beneath the trees ends with the entire landscape spread below the sanctuary. Number 2. Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe, La Crosse, Wisconsin. One of the Midwest's most significant Marian pilgrimage destinations did not emerge from a medieval sanctuary or an apparition that happened on American soil. It began with a bold modern vision. In 1999, Bishop Raymond Burke announced plans to establish a shrine dedicated to Our Lady of Guadalupe on the wooded bluffs outside La Crosse, carrying into Wisconsin the devotion rooted in the apparitions to Saint Juan Diego at Tepeyac in 1531. Construction began in 2001, and 7 years later, the shrine church was dedicated, giving the project a permanent spiritual center. But the ambition went beyond building another beautiful church. The grounds were arranged so that arriving pilgrims would gradually leave ordinary surroundings behind. From the Pilgrim Center, a path leads deeper into more than 100 acres of wooded hillside before reaching the church, with devotional spaces appearing along the way. Inside the sanctuary, marble, sacred art, and the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe focus attention toward the altar, while beyond the church, the Rosary Walk and Stations of the Cross continue through the landscape. Then the young shrine began acquiring connections far beyond Wisconsin. In 2011, Pope Benedict XVI granted it a spiritual affiliation with the Papal Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome, extending certain spiritual privileges to pilgrims under the church's prescribed conditions. A decade later, another affiliation connected La Crosse with the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. In barely more than 20 years, a shrine built on a Wisconsin hillside had developed spiritual ties with both Rome and Tepeyac, 2 places separated from the Midwest by thousands of miles, but central to Catholic Marian devotion. That rapid transformation gives La Crosse a character unlike the older shrines on this list. Pilgrims can begin beneath the trees, follow the path toward the church, and eventually enter a sanctuary where the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe rises directly behind the altar. Outside, the wooded Wisconsin bluffs remain visible around the shrine, placing a devotion born at Tepeyac within a landscape that could hardly look more different from central Mexico. Number 1. National Shrine of Our Lady of Champion, Wisconsin. For more than a century, Catholics traveled to a quiet stretch of Wisconsin farmland, carrying a story the church had not yet formally judged. It began in October of 1859, when Adele Breeze, a young Belgian immigrant, reported seeing a woman dressed in white standing between 2 trees. After the figure appeared again, Adele sought advice from her priest. When the woman returned a third time, Adele asked who she was and what she wanted. According to the account preserved at Champion, she identified herself as the Queen of Heaven and instructed Adele to pray for sinners and teach children the Catholic faith. Adele acted immediately. She walked from home to home across the Wisconsin frontier, sometimes traveling as far as 50 miles, teaching catechism and even helping families with household work so their children could receive instruction. A chapel, school, and small religious community gradually formed around the mission. Then, in October of 1870, disaster closed in. Fire swept through northeastern Wisconsin, destroying farms and settlements as families fled through smoke and extreme heat. Some ran toward Adele's chapel, where those gathered prayed the rosary and carried a statue of Mary around the grounds, while flames approached from several directions. By morning, much of the surrounding area had been devastated, yet the chapel, school, convent, and roughly 5 acres around them remained standing. Shrine records describe the fire reaching and scorching the boundary fence without crossing into the grounds. The story survived for generations. But popular devotion was not the same as church approval. In 2009, Bishop David Ricken opened a formal investigation into the reported apparitions, Adele's life, and the message attributed to Mary. On December 8, 2010, he declared the apparitions worthy of belief, making Champion the site of the first church-approved Marian apparition in the United States. Pilgrimage here continues on a remarkable scale. In May of 2026, more than 10,000 people joined the annual Walk to Mary, with the full route extending 22 miles to Champion. Pilgrims arriving today can descend into the apparition oratory near the place associated with Adele's encounters, then walk outside across the same rural grounds where the fire reached the boundary in 1870. Across the American Midwest, these pilgrimage sites reveal a Catholic landscape far richer than many people expect. Some preserve relics carried across continents, others grew around Marian devotion, sacrifice, healing, or generations of prayer, and one began with a reported apparition that would wait more than a century for formal church judgment. From quiet chapels and wooded hills to candlelight processions and crowded pilgrimage routes, each place continues to draw people who arrive with something deeper than curiosity. Pilgrimage does not end when the road ends. For many Catholics, the real journey begins at the altar, beside a relic, before an image of Mary, or in the silence of a shrine where generations have already prayed before them. If you enjoyed discovering these Catholic pilgrimage sites across the American Midwest, subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue exploring the sacred places, hidden histories, and extraordinary stories of the Catholic Church around the world.